Daniel got his raise in March, 4%. His manager called it a strong year for him. He believed it, walked out of that meeting feeling like things were finally moving in the right direction. That Saturday, he did what he always does. Same grocery list, same store in Barrie, Ontario. Eggs, ground beef, milk, bread, a bag of apples, chicken thighs, some frozen vegetables because the fresh ones felt like a luxury now. He scanned his own loyalty card at checkout, the way you do when you're trying to feel a little more in control of the number that's about to appear. He'd almost put a bag of grapes back before deciding it wasn't worth the awkwardness of standing there recalculating in front of the person behind him. The total came to $211. Last year, the exact same list cost him $184. That's $27 gone on the same food in 12 months. His raise was supposed to be the thing that made his life easier this year. Instead, he stood there doing math in his head at the checkout line, and the math didn't work. 4% more coming in, 15% more going out on food alone. He wasn't spending recklessly. He wasn't buying anything different. He was just standing still while the ground moved under him. And here's the part that should bother you. Daniel did everything right. He got the raise. He didn't take on new debt. He didn't upgrade his lifestyle. And he is still losing. If you believe financial freedom starts with knowledge, subscribe to Financial Freedom Canada with Marcus. New videos every day to help you build lasting wealth. That's not a personal failure. That's a system doing exactly what it was built to do. 2 streets over from Daniel lives Margaret. She's 71, retired, living on CPP and OAS, a fixed income that gets a small cost of living bump once a year, always announced months after the prices already moved. Margaret doesn't get a raise at all. She gets an adjustment, calculated off an average that doesn't reflect what actually happened at her specific grocery store. When ground beef jumps 18% in a year, Margaret's pension doesn't jump 18%. It moves a fraction of that, on a delay, while she's already paid the higher price for months. Daniel is losing ground slowly. Margaret is losing ground on a level she has no way to work her way out of because there's no overtime shift for a retiree, no promotion coming next year. 2 different households, 2 different paychecks, hit by the exact same mechanism. Let's start with the number nobody explains properly. In 2026, food inflation in Canada is running well above the headline inflation rate you hear on the news. The overall consumer price index might sit around 2.5%. Grocery prices, the actual basket of things a family needs to eat, have been climbing faster, driven by meat, dairy, and packaged goods. That gap between the number on the news and the number on your receipt is not an accident of reporting. It's a gap that has existed for years, and it always lands on the same category: food. The one thing you cannot choose to stop buying. Economists have a term for what happened to Daniel: real wages versus nominal wages. Nominal is the number on his paycheck. Real is what that number can actually buy once you strip out inflation. His nominal wage went up 4%. His real wage, once you account for what food alone did to his budget, went negative. He is working the same hours, doing the same job, getting praised for the same performance, and ending every month with less breathing room than he had the year before. Nobody at his job will ever tell him that. His raise looks identical on paper whether prices went up 2% or 20%. The number in his bank account tells the real story, and the real story is that he's losing ground. Break the receipt down category by category, and the pattern gets sharper. Eggs surged after outbreaks of avian flu wiped out egg-laying flocks, and that explanation is real, but egg prices stayed elevated long after flock numbers recovered, because once a price climbs, there's very little competitive pressure pushing it back down. Cooking oil went through something similar, a genuine supply shock from global sunflower oil disruptions, followed by a price that never quite returned to where it started, even once the original disruption passed. Beef prices climbed because of a smaller national cattle herd, a real supply story, but the increase at the retail shelf consistently outpaced the increase paid to the rancher who actually raised the animal. Every single one of these stories starts with something true: a shortage, a disease outbreak, a weather event, and every single one of them ends the same way, with the price staying high well past the point where the original excuse still applies. Now here's where most people stop looking, and where the real problem actually starts. You've been told the story that grocery prices go up because of supply chains, because of weather, because of the war overseas, because of fuel costs. All partially true. But that story conveniently leaves out the part where three companies control the overwhelming majority of grocery retail in this country: Loblaw, Sobeys, and Metro. When your options at the shelf are effectively controlled by three boardrooms, you are not participating in a competitive market. You are participating in a market that looks competitive from the outside and behaves like a shared agreement on the inside. Look at the profit margins instead of the excuses. While Daniel's grocery bill climbed 15%, the farmers who actually grow the wheat and raise the cattle did not see their income climb anywhere close to that. Farm gate prices. What a dairy farmer or a grain producer actually gets paid. Moved a fraction of what the shelf price moved. So if the farmer isn't getting rich off this, and the fuel and packaging costs only explain part of it, where did the rest of that 15% go? It went into the layer sitting between the farm and Daniel's cart: processing, distribution, and retail margin. Grocery retail profit margins in Canada have expanded, not shrunk, through the exact years this crisis was supposedly hurting everyone equally. It didn't hurt everyone equally. It hurt the people buying food, and it rewarded the people selling it back to them. This is the first illusion cracking open. You were told rising grocery prices are just the cost of a difficult global economy, something that happens to everyone the same way, like weather. It is not weather. It is a designed outcome of a concentrated market where the companies setting your prices answer to shareholders who expect growth every single quarter, inflation or not. When a system needs to show growth no matter what the economy is doing, and that system controls the shelf price of the one thing you cannot opt out of buying, guess who absorbs the difference? It's not the shareholder. It's Daniel, standing at the checkout, watching a number he can't argue with. This isn't a fringe theory. Executives from the country's largest grocery chains have been called in front of parliamentary committees specifically to answer questions about the gap between rising prices and rising profits. The public explanation is always the same. Costs went up across the board, we're just passing them along. Our margins haven't really changed. But when a company's own quarterly earnings reports show profit growth that outpaces both inflation and revenue growth from volume, the math stops supporting the explanation. You can't simultaneously claim you're barely covering rising costs and report a record quarter to your shareholders in the same season. One of those two statements is being said for a different audience than the other. Think about what a truly competitive grocery market would actually look like. If Daniel wasn't happy with the price at one chain, he'd walk to a genuinely independent competitor down the street. And that competitive pressure would force prices back down on its own, the way markets are supposed to self-correct. That kind of market barely exists anymore in most Canadian cities. Independent grocers have been squeezed out over decades, unable to match the buying power, the real estate leverage, or the private label margins of the big three. So when Daniel feels like he has no real choice, that's not a feeling. That's an accurate read of the actual market structure he's shopping inside. The choice was engineered out of the system long before he ever picked up a shopping basket. And there's a second trick buried in this one, something you've probably felt without having the word for it: shrinkflation. Walk down the cereal aisle and the box looks the same. Same colors, same brands, same shelf space, but it's 400 grams now instead of 450. The price didn't change. The tissue paper box, the yogurt tub, the bag of chips, the coffee bag, all of them have quietly gotten smaller while staying the same price, sometimes for years, before anyone notices. It's a slower, sneakier version of the same inflation, dressed up to avoid the sticker shock that would make people angry enough to switch stores. You're not imagining that you're buying groceries more often now. You are. The package is lying to you about how much food is actually inside it. Daniel actually caught this one himself, by accident. He keeps his receipts in a drawer, an old habit from his dad, and one night, out of boredom, he lined up two receipts from the same coffee brand 8 months apart. Same shelf tag, same price, $3 less coffee in the bag the second time. He did the math per gram, not per bag, and the real price increase on that one item was closer to 11%, hidden completely behind a sticker that never changed. Multiply that across a cart of 20 or 30 items, most of which have quietly shrunk at some point in the last 2 years, and the total damage is far larger than what the official grocery inflation number ever captured. Because shrinkflation, by design, doesn't show up cleanly in that number at all. So Daniel adjusts, the way anyone would. He starts buying the cheaper cuts of meat. He switches from name brand to store brand on almost everything. He buys in bulk when he can, tells himself he's being smart about it. And on paper, his monthly total does come down a bit. This feels like a win. It is not a win. It's the second illusion, and this one is more dangerous than the first because it looks like discipline instead of decline. Here's what actually happens when a family trades quality for price under sustained pressure month after month, year after year. The cheaper cuts of meat carry more sodium, more preservatives. The store-brand snacks are built around cheap oils and refined sugar because those are the cheapest calories to manufacture at scale. The fresh produce that used to be a normal part of the cart becomes an occasional purchase instead of a weekly one because fresh food spoils and cheap processed food does not. Daniel isn't eating worse because he doesn't care about his health. He's eating worse because the cheapest available calories in this system are almost without exception the least nutritious ones. That's not a coincidence either. Ultra-processed food is profitable precisely because the ingredients are cheap and the shelf life is long. Margaret feels this version of the trap differently than Daniel does. She doesn't have a family to feed on a shrinking budget, but she has a fixed income and a body that's less forgiving of cheap food than it used to be. She switched from fresh fish, which she loved, to canned, because the price gap became impossible to justify on her pension. She switched from her usual brand of bread to a cheaper one with a longer ingredient list. None of these were dramatic decisions. Each one, on its own, saved her maybe $2 or $3 a week. Over a year, small decisions like that add up to real money saved, and also to a diet that looks noticeably different from the one she had 5 years ago, before any of this started. She'll tell you she's just being sensible. She's also, without ever choosing it directly, been pushed toward the cheapest available calories in the system, the same as Daniel, just from a different starting point. This is the compounding trap. In 5 years, Daniel's grocery bill might look under control because he's optimized it down to the cheapest version of feeding his family. But his blood pressure numbers at his next physical don't come back the way they used to. His energy in the afternoon is worse. His dentist mentions something about his diet without being asked. None of that shows up on a grocery receipt. It shows up on a medical bill 18 months later, or a missed day of work, or a prescription he didn't need 5 years ago. The system didn't just take money out of his pocket at the checkout. It quietly moved the cost forward in time and dressed it up as a health problem instead of a financial one. You cannot see this trap while you're inside it, because every individual choice feels rational. Buy the cheaper thing, stretch the budget. It's the accumulation across years that turns being careful with money into trading long-term health for short-term survival, without anyone ever explicitly choosing that trade. Zoom out from Daniel's kitchen table for a second, because this problem is bigger than one grocery list. The Bank of Canada spent years raising interest rates to fight inflation, and the tool they used, higher borrowing costs, hits renters and mortgage holders hardest, while doing almost nothing to touch the concentrated pricing power sitting inside 3 grocery chains. Raising interest rates makes it more expensive for Daniel to ever buy a home, more expensive for a small independent grocer to expand and actually compete with the big 3, and does close to nothing to break up the market structure that's driving food prices in the first place. The policy tool used to fight inflation ends up reinforcing the exact concentration of power that's causing the food inflation people feel most in their daily life. And underneath all of that sits a wider truth about who this system is actually built for. Wage growth in this country has consistently lagged corporate profit growth for over a decade. When corporate Canada posts record profits and the average worker's raise barely tracks the true cost of living, that's not two separate stories happening to coincide. That's the same story told from two different rooms. One room is getting bigger. The other room is being told to be grateful for 4%. There's an immigration angle to this too, one that rarely gets connected to the grocery bill directly. Canada's population has grown quickly in recent years, which increases overall demand for food, housing, and services faster than domestic supply chains and local production can easily scale. That's a real pressure on prices. But population growth alone doesn't explain why retail margins specifically expanded during that same window, rather than simply passing higher volume costs straight through. More demand can justify some price increase. It doesn't automatically justify a bigger profit margin sitting on top of that increase. Those are two different things being blended into one convenient explanation, and the blending is not an accident. There's also a currency layer most people never think about at the grocery store. A large share of the produce on Canadian shelves, especially in winter, gets priced in US dollars before it ever crosses the border because it's grown somewhere warmer and imported. When the Canadian dollar weakens against the US dollar, that produce gets more expensive here, even if nothing changed about how it was grown, shipped, or sold. Daniel isn't just paying for lettuce. In the dead of winter, he's partially paying for a currency exchange rate he has no control over, and probably doesn't even know is baked into the price of his salad. So what does someone in Daniel's position actually do with this? Not a fantasy plan, a real one. The first move is recognizing that reacting to price increases item by item, chasing the cheapest version of everything, is a losing game long term, because the health cost eventually cancels out the savings. That doesn't mean ignoring the budget. It means shifting the strategy from panic substitution toward planning around the categories that actually move the needle, protein and produce, rather than shaving pennies off items that barely affect the total. The smarter move is auditing where the money is actually going, not with guilt, but with precision. Figuring out the real gap between what a household is spending on food now versus 18 months ago, and treating that gap as information, not just frustration. The second move is understanding that the only real defense against a system designed to erode your purchasing power is putting money to work somewhere that grows faster than the erosion. That means directing whatever margin exists, even a small amount, into a TFSA holding broad market equities, instead of letting it sit in a checking account, losing value in real terms every single month. It won't fix this year's grocery bill. It changes what happens over the next 10 years, because compounding is the only force in this equation that's actually on your side instead of working against you. Inflation compounds against you silently every month, whether you notice it or not. The only honest counter to a silent compounding force is another compounding force working in the opposite direction. And that's exactly what a long-term investment account is built to do. The third move is simpler and harder to hear. Stop expecting a raise to fix this. A raise inside a system where food, shelter, and essential costs are rising faster than wages is not a solution. It's a slower version of the same problem. The families getting ahead in this environment are not the ones getting the biggest annual raise. They're the ones who understood early that the raise was never going to be enough and built a second track: investments, side income, anything that doesn't depend on an employer's definition of a good year. For Margaret, the version of this looks different because she's past the point of building a career track. Her move is defensive rather than offensive. It means looking closely at whether every dollar of her fixed income is actually working as hard as it can, whether money sitting idle in a low-interest account is losing value in real terms every month it stays there, and whether small, unglamorous corrections, an unused subscription canceled, a better rate on the little savings she does have, can claw back some of what inflation quietly took. It won't undo what's already happened to her grocery bill. It stops the bleeding from getting worse on every front at once. None of this is a happy ending, and it shouldn't be dressed up as one. Daniel didn't do anything wrong. Neither did Margaret. He worked hard. He got his raise. He went to the same grocery store he's gone to for years. The system around him was never designed to reward that kind of quiet consistency. It was designed to extract a little more from him every year while making sure the number on his paycheck looked like progress. Understanding that isn't depressing, it's the only thing that actually changes anything, because you cannot out-earn a system you don't understand. You can only see it clearly, stop playing by its rules alone, and start building something outside of it that it can't quietly erode. Daniel still shops at the same store. Margaret still keeps her receipts folded in that same drawer. Nothing about the outside of their lives looks different. What's different is that they've stopped waiting for the next raise, the next cost of living adjustment, the next headline promising relief to fix a problem those things were never built to fix. That's not motivation. That's just what's actually true.
If this story changed the way you see money, subscribe for more deep story about finance, power, and the system behind it.